Hi everyone and welcome to the next part of Aron Nimzowitsch, my system. The customary quote, "Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. You must feel the force around you." I was reminded recently of this beautiful and thought-provoking quote from Master Yoda of Star Wars. I have been touched by the support I have received from some amazingly lovely people in the chess community that I have never met in person. I keep mentioning them in the videos here on my YouTube channel as a gesture of gratitude and genuine appreciation. Thank you very much for being kind to me, and I wish you all the very best from the bottom of my heart. Now, a review of the last part, where we begin the second chapter on open files and discussed introductory and general considerations along with the definition of open files, the genesis or origins of open files, the ideal of every operation in a file and obstacles in open files, along with a few examples on the two methods of conducting the attack against obstructing enemy pawns, the evolutionary and revolutionary attack. So now, moving further into the book, Nimzowitsch gives another example to explain the difference between an evolutionary and revolutionary attack, where we have this position on board. Nimzowitsch writes, the evolutionary attack would, after rook h1, knight f8 and bishop e7, followed by bishop takes on f8, thinning defenders' ranks by exchange, lead to the winning of the objective, that is, rook takes on h7. The revolutionary attack, on the other hand, would dispense with the mere win of the black h-pawn as follows: rook takes on h7, king takes on h7. There can be no talk of having won the pawn here, for white has given up a rook for it. Rook h1 check, king g8 and rook h8 mate. The idea of the revolutionary attacks lies, as is here clearly shown, in opening by sheer force an entry to the 7th or 8th rank, which had been barred to us. One rook sacrifices himself for his colleague so that the latter may reach the objective, the 8th rank. Yes, even on a chessboard, there is such a thing as true comradeship. In what chronological order are these two methods of attack to be employed? The answer to this is: first, try the converging attack. That is, attack the obstructing pawn with several pieces. By so doing, opportunity may be found to force the defending pieces into uncomfortable positions where they will get into one another's way. For the defense will often be cramped for space. Afterwards, see whether among other things there is a possibility of a breakthrough by force. In other words, of a revolutionary attack. Moving on, Nimzowitsch discusses about the restricted advance in one file with the idea of giving up that file for another. That is the indirect exploitation of a file, the file as a jumping off place. He explains this concept with the following position on board. Nimzowitsch writes, in the position shown here, the direct exploitation of the f file with eventual rook takes on f7 after, say, first driving off the protecting rook would be impossible with the scanty or little material available. The simple rook f5, however, clearly wins a pawn, and later rook b7 may follow. It is important that we examine this maneuver to see its logical meaning. Since rook f7 was impracticable or not feasible, there could be no question of a direct exploitation of the f-file in our sense. On the other hand, it would be pushing ingratitude to an extreme length if we went on to assert that the f-file had no bearing whatever on the capture of black's b-pawn. Where then does the truth lie? The answer is the file was here used not directly, not to its fullest extent, but indirectly as a kind of jumping off place. Nimzowitsch then gives a positional example of the file as a jumping off place through a diagram where we have this position on board, where we can see the potential of indirect use of the C file as a springboard to the A file, with rook c5 and rook a5 to follow, with an attack on black's A pawn. Moving further, Nimzowitsch writes about the outpost, the radius of attack, with what piece should one occupy an advanced position on a center file and on a flank, change of roles, and what this proves. He explains this through this position on the board here. Nimzowitsch writes, white has the center and the D file. In other respects, the positions are equal. White with the move will now attempt an operation in the D file. This presents some difficulties since the protected black pawn at D6 represents a granite block. If white, in spite of the rules laid down before, proceeded to assail black's D pawn with rook d2 and rook d1, not only the esteemed reader but the black d pawn would ridicule him. So we had better keep to the rules and perhaps try to undermine the position by e5. But this too proves to be impossible, for the enemy's possession of the e file is a quite sufficient bar to any projected pawn move to e5. Accordingly, let us give up the D file as such and content ourselves with an indirect exploitation of it by restricted advance rook d4 to be followed later by rook a4. But this maneuver too is somewhat weak, for black's queenside is too compact. Note that if black's A pawn were isolated, it would be wholly in place to bring up by a similar process the king rook to the A file via the D file. Since all attempts have so far broken down, we begin to look for some other base of operations, and we would be wrong in so doing, for the D file can be exploited in this position. The key move is knight d5, and the knight placed here we call the outpost. By this we mean a piece, usually a knight, established on an open file in enemy territory and protected, of course, by a pawn. This knight, protected and supported as he is, will, in consequence of his radius of attack, exercise a disturbing influence and will therefore cause the opponent to weaken his position in the d file in order to drive him away by c6. And therefore we may say A. An advanced post forms a base for new attacks. B. An outpost provokes a weakening of the enemy's position in the file in question. Rook c8 here would be good for black, and in fact in the position given would be the defense adopted by a strong player. But it takes iron nerves to let a knight so threateningly posted remain in his place hour after hour. Moreover, there may come a time when black will be forced to make the weakening move, c6. But after knight d5 and c6, there follows knight c3, and now the black d pawn after white's rook d2 followed by rook d1 will certainly not laugh any longer. It is important for the student to know that the strength of an outpost lies in its strategic connection with its own hinterland. The outpost does not derive its strength from itself, but rather from this hinterland, namely from the open file and the protecting pawn. And if suddenly one or other of these points of contact failed, it would almost entirely lose its prestige and significance. For instance, here, let us place an extra white pawn at d3. The d file would in this case be closed, and then if c6, knight c3, the black d pawn would not be weak. For how should a body be weak if it is not exposed to attack? Again, assuming a white pawn on d3 which blocks the rook from an open file. Or again, suppose the white pawn were at e3 instead of e4. Contact with the pawn now fails, as is painfully evident after the moves c6, knight c3 and d5, and white has achieved nothing. Whereas with the white pawn at e4, the black d pawn would remain paralyzed backward at any rate for a considerable time. Therefore, the file to its rear and the protecting pawn are essential accompaniments to an advanced outpost. Nimzowitsch gives another illustration regarding the outpost through this skeleton position arising out of the Geico piano line of the Italian game, where we can imagine additional pieces on each side. He writes, white has the f file with an advanced post at f5, black the d file with an outpost on d4. Both files at the moment bite on grey knight, that is, on protected pawns. To sap this strength, white will direct his knight via e2 and g3 to f5. The obvious course for black is to drive the knight away by g6. But by inducing this, the strategic mission of white's outpost will have been accomplished, for black's f-pawn becomes a weakness. It is important to notice that moving the knight to f5 was the starting point of a new attack, namely on g7. Very often, the outpost will be exchanged at his station. If the attacking player has played correctly, the retaking piece or pawn will yield full compensation for the piece which has been taken. Here, a conversion of advantages is the order of the day. For instance, if after knight f5 a piece takes the knight, this will be recaptured by the e-pawn, and white now gets the point e4 for a rook or his other knight. And in addition, some possibility after g4, g5 of opening the g file. Further, the pawn now at f5 will effectively render immobile the black pawn at f6, which is the object of attack. Nimzowitsch here refers the reader to Game 5 of the illustrative games section at the end of the book. We shall go through this game towards the end of the series. Once the series is completed, you can jump to the last few videos to look this game up immediately if you want to. Moving on, Nimzowitsch discusses regarding advanced posts in flank files. He writes, in a flank file, the advanced post should be occupied by a piece of heavy metal. Flank files are the A, B, G, and H files. Center files are the C, D, E, and F files. He gives an illustration with this position on the board. Nimzowitsch writes, a flank file is in question here, and the occupation of an advanced post in it by a knight would have little effect, for the attacking range of a knight at g6 would be small, still smaller of course on a rook file. Rook g6 is in fact indicated, since thus we go some way towards gaining control of the g file, which so far has been in dispute, or towards getting some other advantage. It should be noted that the file was disputed, since neither side could move up or down it unchallenged. Freedom to do so. This is the only sure sign that a file is controlled. It therefore remains for white to find a suitable point on which to double his rooks. It can be found if we seek it. Rook g2, rook takes on g2, knight takes on g2, rook g8, and black holds the file. Or rook g4, rook takes on g4, h takes on g4, rook g8, knight g6, and white will hardly be able to make anything of his backward extra pawn. But rook g6 being the outpost, rook takes on g6, otherwise a rook g1, and the rooks are doubled. So rook takes on g6 and h takes on g6 with a giant of a passed pawn, and the possibility after knight f3 of rook g1, g4, h4. So though because of h takes on g6, white's open file is dead, there has arisen from its ashes a passed pawn, with possibilities of attack in the H file. This is a good example of the conversion of advantages referred to above in the case of the exchange of an outpost. Let us stop for a moment longer at the current position on board, and we shall come after rook g6, rook takes on g6, h takes on g6, rook g8 and rook g1 on the track of a characteristic exchange of roles. Before rook takes on g6, the white h pawn protected the rook at g6. After the exchange, a white rook supports the same h pawn, which now has advanced to g6. This action, in which gratitude and kindly feeling are beautifully displayed, shows too that there is a real strategical connection between the g file as such and the pawn, here the h pawn, which protects the advanced post in it. We close this chapter with an example chosen not for entertainment but for instruction, taken from a game between Nimzowitsch with the white pieces and an amateur. So here we have the position illustrated by Nimzowitsch from the game. Knight f4, where Nimzowitsch writes, "Development is a principle well worthy of attention right into the endgame, is one, however, which is neglected by less experienced players even in the opening." Rook g8, rook h7. For present purposes, we would ask the reader to regard this move simply as the occupation of an advanced post. For of course, it could also be regarded as an invasion of the 7th rank. Bishop e8, rook h1. Rook takes on h7, g takes on h7. Conversion of the file into a passed pawn. Rook takes on h7, king f8 and knight h5, with at an opportune moment sacrifice of the knight at f6 would also have been good. But g takes on h7, rook h8, knight g6 check. Bishop takes on g6, f takes on g6, and the passed pawn has become a protected passed pawn. King e6 and rook h5. This restricted advance stops any attempt of black to free himself by perhaps by king e5 or f5, giving access to white's g pawn. b6, c4, where still more paralyzing would be b4, but white follows other plans. So c4, c5, a4, a5, b3, c6, king d2, king d6, king e3, king e6, king f4, king d6, king f5. Now white's plan for breaking through is revealed by zugzwang, that is, by exhausting black's available move, so that finally his king is forced to break contact with e5. White is able to play e5, whereupon the black f pawn disappears and entry of the white rook at f7 will become possible. King e7, e5, f takes on e5, king takes on e5, king d7, and rook f5. Now it will be clear that the move rook h5 had all the elements of the maneuver which we have called a restricted advance in a file. Since rook h5, f5, f7 must willy-nilly, despite the time intervening, be regarded as the maneuvering of the rook from one file to a new file. Black resigned, since rook f7 and rook takes on g7 would have yielded two united passed pawns. The chapter ends with a short note regarding the concept of Zugzwang with the initials PH afterwards, which I am assuming stand for Philip Hereford, the translator of the British English edition of my system. He writes, "There are combinations in chess, for as such must be regarded any series of moves, however quiet, which stand in logical relationship to one another, which are based on the fact that to move in his turn is obligatory on a player. This obligation, in general a welcome one, may weigh heavily on him if his pieces are disposed for attack and defense as favorably as the circumstances allow, and when any change in their configuration can only be detrimental. In such a position, his condition will get worse step by step, until he is forced by the necessity of making a move to relax his hold on or weaken some key point, and his game collapses. A combination directed to bring about such a catastrophe is called by the Germans Zugzwang, compulsion to move, and the player who succumbs under it is said to have got into Zugzwang. The ending just examined is an excellent example. With rook h5 here, white announces Zugzwang. To prevent white succeeding in his object to break through in the f-file, it is vital for black that his king maintain contact with e5. To do this, he is confined to the squares e6 and d6. At last compelled to make a move, he is forced to give up his contact, and white breaks through. Since the player under Zugzwang cannot have the resource of marking time without sensibly altering his position, it will be clear that the opportunity to use the Zugzwang weapon will normally present itself only in the endgame, and most often when only kings and pawns remain on the board. Alright, we conclude this part of Aron Nimzowitsch, My System here, and we shall begin chapter 3, the 7th and 8th ranks from the next part. Shout out to Walkerboy for subscribing and gifting 10 subscriptions to viewers on my Twitch stream last week. Walkerboy has a passion for chess. He's from Alberta, Canada, and an occasional chess streamer as well. I will post a link to his stream in the video description. Do check him out. Olipals, who resubscribed for the 3rd month. Karmadumpster with a subscription. He's from USA and an intermediate level player. Skwerly aka Derek with 3 gifted subscriptions to viewers on my stream. Walkerboy again being the top cheerer with 2500 bits. Amazing support by him. Karmadumpster at 2nd with 401 bits. Jacob G99 at 3rd with 206 bits, and Simon Twitch at 4th with 100 bits last week. Thank you for the kind support, everyone. Much appreciated. Alright, till next time, take care.